All right, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining Thinking Outside the Blocks, Reimagining Space in Boston, a community conversation on city lot use and housing in the greater Boston area. My name is Emily Hostetler. I use the pronouns she and her, and I'm an education associate on the forum team at the Museum of Science in Boston, which engages community members, scientists, and policymakers about issues that lie at the intersection of science and society. I'll be serving as the moderator for today's program. If you're watching on Facebook, please note that to ask questions, you'll have to click on the Zoom link in the caption of this video. On Zoom, just press the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and include your name if you'd like a shout out if we end up asking your question. We do ask that you please keep your questions respectful, constructive, and focused on the topic. If you'd like to see captions, you can click on the closed captions button at the bottom of your screen and select show captions. I would like to start today's program by acknowledging and thanking my many colleagues and partners who were crucial in the co-creation and implementation of this forum and event. Please turn on your videos, and when I introduce you, please give a wave. I'd like to thank Janine Mishka, my colleague on the forum team, Marta Bayer from our Museum Research and Evaluation team, Caitlin Callahan from the Urban College of Boston, Nigel Jacob from the Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics, Taylor Kane and Wandy Pascal from the City of Boston's Housing Innovation Lab, and Kevin Miniter from Consider It. Thank you all so much for your hard work, dedication, and flexibility for this program. I would, of course, also like to thank the National Science Foundation, whose funding made this work and program possible. In just a moment, we will begin by hearing from a few of our wonderful presenters about city lot development and housing in Boston. Then we will have a few minutes for Q&A with our presenters, so be sure to ask those questions. After that, it's going to be your turn. We'll share an exciting new way for all of you to share your opinions and ideas with all of us, including our city officials. We'll be putting a link on the screen for you to go to a website, read through some additional information, and submit your own opinions and ideas and discuss them with other participants using a website called Consider It. Don't worry, that's just a preview. We will give you more information before we send you off. All right, so let's begin. I'd like to introduce our first two presenters from the City of Boston, Taylor Kane, Director of Housing Innovation Lab, and Wendy Pascal, Housing Innovation Design Fellow. As part of the Housing Innovation Lab, Taylor and Wandy focus on planning for Boston's growth in a way that prioritizes our community's quality of life while experimenting with new ideas and collaborating with partners like the Museum of Science to move forward. As a reminder, ask your questions in the Q&A box and we'll collect them for our Q&A section later. Go ahead and welcome Taylor and Wandy. Take it away.
Hi, everyone. I will just quickly share my screen with you all, but would love to, there we go. Could I actually get a confirmation from someone to know if the presentation itself is showing at the moment?
Yes, I see your presentation.
Awesome, thank you. So my name is Wandy Pascual. I'll let Taylor introduce yourself as well.
Hi, Taylor Kane. So great to be here with all of y'all.
Yeah, so we are the Housing Innovation Lab and have been really excited for this partnership and, you know, have been also, it was sort of really wonderful to hear from previous focus groups with the museum to know that folks are really interested in understanding a little bit more about how housing came into play in the city and how development overall comes into play in the city as well. So we're wanting to sort of do an introduction of the Housing Innovation Lab, and then afterwards we'll talk about the two different sections that are actually on the website itself. So to begin, so the Mayor's Housing Innovation Lab was created in 2015 to bring design thinking and innovation into solving Boston's middle income housing challenge. It came out of the Housing a Changing City plan for Boston 2030. And the lab itself is a part of the Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics, the city's civic and research and design team, really tasked with sort of like exploring and tackling experiments and prototypes that cover a wide range of topics. The Housing Innovation Lab is embedded within the Department of Neighborhood Development, which is a department responsible for the creation of affordable housing in the city. So our mission statement is really to, right, how do we create space to imagine and develop different tools, models, and systems that really promote diverse and inclusive residential environments in the city of Boston. So we typically like to share this funnel image to talk about how we put projects into play. So our method typically begins with this exploration phase, and we get potential projects sort of like presented, and we consider them as well. And then they, would potentially move into this experiment phase where we really try to test it out and see how it could actually come into play and what the factors should be considered along the way as well. And then eventually there's this evaluation period where we sort of overlook some of the things that might have gone well, the things that didn't go quite as we expected, and really seeing if that could potentially be scaled up to some extent. And while that typically looks like a linear process, it also oftentimes looks a little more like this. So as we know, a project can go from the exploration phase to experiment, and due to unexpected factors to be considered, go right back to the exploration phase as well. And sometimes they make it to an evaluation period, but having to go right back to a different sort of like exploration moment and phase. And so the question for this housing challenge actually was inspired by one of our ongoing projects titled Housing with Public Assets, where the ultimate question for that is, can building housing on top of or next to city assets such as libraries, community centers, and even parking lots benefit our communities? Something that stemmed also from a series of community conversations and understanding what are the sort of what sites are in our inventory as the city itself. So this is a great transition to sort of talk about the first section of the website itself and of the experience that you're going to embark on. You'll get to see on the website that there are different stakeholders and users that we'll be considering. And so those range from neighborhood residents to city planner to developer, among many others. And from then on, we sort of would like to talk about this process of how lot development itself takes place in the city. So we know that there's a few different agencies that own parcels of land in the city itself. So we have city agencies like the Boston Planning and Development Agency, BPDA, and the Department of Neighborhood Development, which is typically responsible for creating affordable housing in the city. And then there's also state agencies. So these are agencies like DCR, the Department of Conservation and Recreation, and MassDOT, Massachusetts Department of Transportation. So from then on, the different agencies sort of take a look at their inventory and then do due diligence. So this involves taking a look at the title work to really confirm property ownership, and then conducting a property survey to see if it's that it can be developed in the way that residents would need it to be developed. And then there's an evaluation of appraisal of the value of the property itself. And finally, a feasibility study to see exactly what can be built there. And then from this moment, we sort of transition into conducting community conversations and building partnerships with community members to discuss the different options for what they would like to see there, and also get feedback on some of the ideas that we think about presenting. So why we also ask the question, right, why redevelop? And there's a number of reasons as to why this takes place, but some of those might be that the city doesn't need land for a municipal purpose anymore. So for example, parking lots, or D&D might consider redeveloping vacant tax foreclosed land into housing. So in this first section of the website, we're going to be asking folks to imagine that they are actually a part of this initial community meeting to really discuss what the potential use is for the site in question. So there's a range of possibilities here for the different uses. And then we ask folks to sort of rate those from low priority to high priority. And some of the questions that come into play, and to really think about the stakeholders that are to be considered in this experience, right? So some of the questions that might arise are, does this neighborhood or does this area need more residential spaces to support local businesses? Is there a higher need for commercial spaces to support the residences? And also, in considering the existing sort of like parks in the area and green space, right? Is there a higher need for more green space in the area as well? And I will let Taylor talk about the housing development.
Great, thanks, Wandy. So one of the things that we're really interested in exploring in this kind of virtual forum space is the process that's leading up to the construction of new housing in Boston, and thinking about the role that residents and other key stakeholders play in the planning and pre-development processes. So some of the questions that we've been thinking about as we were kind of approaching the site in this forum space is, what is the process for engaging residents? How can we have conversations about what communities want and need from spaces? What are our priorities? And then this big question around, what are the trade-offs we must weigh in realizing some of our housing goals? So I'm gonna talk about the housing development phase, and this will really pick up where the lot development piece that Wandy just talked about left off. And for this particular kind of set of slides, we're gonna make the assumption that during the initial community meeting that Wandy just referenced, that community members really reached a consensus and decided that housing was at the very top of their list of priorities for the space in question. And from here on out, I'll kind of lay out the process of what housing development looks like in Boston. So the next phase of the process would be to write a request for proposal, which would tell developers what kind of proposals the Department of Neighborhood Development or the Boston Planning and Development Agency, whoever the issuing agency is, wants to see, and explains how the submissions will be evaluated. The requirements for this request for proposal, or RFP, will reflect the discussions that the issuing agency has had with community members, so that the proposals are really reflecting the input of stakeholders who have been involved in the kind of initial conversations. Once the RFP is issued, at that point, developers will start to respond to it. Once all of the developer responses are submitted, the issuing agency is going to evaluate the proposals to see which best meets the criteria that's been laid out in the RFP. And depending on the type of municipally owned property or parcel that we're talking about, the decision around what proposal to move forward with might be decided by an internal selection committee, or maybe a committee that involves community members as well. In many cases, there's also going to be a community meeting where developers will present their proposals to community members so that folks have the opportunity to provide feedback and also ask questions about each proposal. So after the selection committee makes a decision and then awards the property to a developer, the developer will then begin this process of securing funding or applying for public subsidy for the project they proposed. The developer at this point will also go through a development review process and go about getting permits for the project. When all of that work is finished and the project is ready for construction, the issuing agency will then sell or lease the land to the developer. So there's lots of benefit to taking this approach to building on publicly owned land, and we'll speak to some of this. You'll get to see some of this when you transition to the considerate site, and so I'll save some mystery for that point. But at this point, as I kind of led with, in this section, we're really imagining that after this initial community meeting, there's been a consensus around housing. So it's now a matter of asking some questions around, well, what type of housing do we want to see? Is it just going to be housing? Is it going to be housing and maybe green space? Thinking about what are the different priorities and potential development scenarios that could take place on a particular lot. And so we're asking folks to consider the following priorities. So there's social, there's economic, and environmental, and thinking about the different ways of arranging those different priorities into development scenarios. So we're really looking forward to hearing your questions and getting your thoughts on the site. And yeah, looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you so much, Taylor and Wandy. That was excellent as always and so informative. That will help us a lot later when we send you all off to try out the website for yourself. So we did have some questions come in, but I think we'll do those at the end. We do have one more person I think we should hear from, Nigel. So our next presenter will talk for a few minutes about how community members like me and like all of you can learn more about how to get involved with these city processes and kind of just learn more about what is going on in Boston and maybe in your own city as well if you're not from Boston. So I'd like to welcome Nigel Jacob, co-founder of the Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics, which is a civic innovation incubator and R&D lab within Boston City Hall. Nigel's work is about making urban life better via innovative, people-oriented applications of technology and design. So thank you so much for being here, Nigel, and go ahead. And I'm going to turn on your video because you have been disappeared. So you should be able to turn on your video now.
Great. Can you see me? Here I am. Awesome. Thanks, Emily. I just wanted to start out by saying thank you so much for inviting me. And on behalf of the mayor, to you all, welcome to this forum. It's been a long time coming, and we're super excited that you've all showed up. By way of introduction, I'll say 2 minutes about what the Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics is. For the last several years, the mayor has been very aware that innovation and creativity doesn't happen by accident. You have to invest time and sweat equity in this work. And so this was the starting point for the Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics. It was this idea that you have to create a team that is dedicated to trying out new things and approaching traditional problems in new ways. And so that's where we start. And that was also the starting place for the Housing Innovation Lab. When the mayor first took office, he was very aware of the fact that Boston had not had a strategic plan for decades, for about 40 years. And that was one of one of the things he started first was to say, we should have a process by which we talk to our residents about the future of the city. And so that was Imagine Boston 2030. If you hadn't read it, you should check it out. It's a long read, but there are some good executive summaries for you to kind of get the highlights of the plan. And the planning effort was a very community-led exercise. So this was not city bureaucrats talking at people, but this was residents showing up and talking about the future of Boston. And one of the things we heard loud and clear, again, at each moment when we had an Imagine Boston forum, was that housing is one of the most critical issues in Boston. And the other two, if you're interested, were public education and transportation. Probably not surprising. But I think through that exercise, the mayor really got the sense that when we are at our best, when City Hall, city government is connecting and interacting with our residents. And that was why, this forum was so attractive to us. And as Emily said, we try to be as accessible as possible. So there's lots of different ways that y'all can get involved in the way that local government works here in Boston. First, I'll mention there's our Boss 3-in-1 mobile phone app It's on Android and iPhone. If you've never used it, give it a try. It's an easy way to dip your toes into making Boston better, right? So it's basically an app that allows you to see an issue that's broken, like a street light or a pothole, and you snap a photo on the app and you send it into the folks that will fix it. So that's an easy way to get involved. Another easy way is to attend a community meeting. You know, in Boston, like in most cities, we have community meetings nearly every day. And I think it's often, and if you're interested in understanding what are the issues that your community is grappling with, attending one of these community meetings is probably the easiest way to do this. And right now, with COVID-19 raging outside, in a way, since we're already at home, or should be, the signing up for a virtual meeting, a virtual community meeting, I think is easier than it was. We always did these things online, but now I think it's more approachable than it used to be. And then the other way is really to call us. I think your city officials are fairly approachable. So if you take a look at give some consideration to the issues that are important to you, and just try calling City Hall. You can certainly call us at New Urban Mechanics. We're very findable on the city's website. And, if you'd like to meet with us or talk with us, we're always open to those sorts of things. We hold office hours on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So we're always up for meeting with people and listening to the ideas and thoughts that they have. I think that's all I have to say. I'm really looking forward to this forum. As I said, like, part of my job is to explore new ways to engage with people and to hear what they have to say and find different ways to have collaborative discussions with folks. So I'm really excited to use the platform and see the kinds of discussions we have today. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Nigel. You can keep your video on, and I'll invite Wandy and Taylor to turn on their videos and microphones as well. Thank you again, Nigel, for being here and for that great kind of wrap up and how to get involved. We had some people who were interested in the apps and things like that, so look forward to more posting soon. I'm going to go ahead and get our Q&A started by turning it over to Janine, who will read out some questions for you folks, and you can answer them as you see fit. So go ahead, Janine, and get us started.
Here's your voice of omniscience. Pam Lassiter is asking, is easy access to public transportation included as a priority when you're thinking about these space use and planning issues?
Yes, definitely. So we always think about housing in relationship to the other ways in which people have lives and experience the city. So access to transportation is often a part of the conversation around thinking about the development of lots and what types of uses would make sense there, kind of based on their proximity to the T, to rapid bus lines, to commuter rails. We are close friends with our transportation department.
Okay, and Alexander had a question, which was, how does our public transportation network, it's kind of related, how does our public transportation network influence decisions or goals about land use?
How does, can you repeat that question one more time, please?
Absolutely. How does public transportation, the network, influence decisions or goals about land use?
Yeah, so I would say that it helps us identify potential areas for opportunity in thinking about both our existing transportation network and then also where we have planned investments. Both of those types of both the existing and new investments create different types of opportunities for additional housing development. So we're often looking at both of those pieces.
I'll throw my voice in there. Hello, Taylor's cat. The other aspect of that is we're also very aware that our transportation network is far from equitable, right? So we're also very aware there are major problems there in terms of the ability for people to get across the city in the ways they need to and get to the jobs that they need to. So an unstated consideration there is always this idea that we know that we're not starting from a place of great strength uniformly across the city.
Thank you. Christopher has a question about very, very pressing in the current time, or prescient. Is there any sense that with COVID-19, there could be extremely new or different ways to approach housing, especially condos and apartment? I know right now real estate prices seem to be holding steady.
So is the question about the impact on COVID's impact on our housing landscape?
Yes. So they're wondering if there are going to be newer, different approaches to housing, particularly condos and apartments, because of this situation.
Yeah, so I'll kick it off, and then Wandy and Nigel can definitely jump in. But I do think we've already seen kind of how COVID is dramatically transforming our urban landscape and the ways in which people interact with it. And so because of that, I think that we can imagine ways in which this will have an impact on the type of housing that we develop and the type of housing that people want to see.
I'll say when we consider housing, considering the livability of a community, of a neighborhood is important. And so there are clearly going to be big impacts on how we think about public space over the next several years, and the way that we think about transportation. You know, a lot of cities around the world, and Boston is exploring this too, have started rethinking the allocation of road space. Both temporarily and longer term. And so I think that COVID-19 will leave a long-term impact on the overall physical landscape of Boston.
Okay, thank you. Todd would like to know, what cities do you look to for guidance or leadership as you think about these questions, and how do you share your best practices?
Well, I can start on that. One of the things that we've seen over the past, so I'll answer the second question first. That might need reminding. There are, one of the things that we've seen over the last several years is that there are now, I mean, there always have been, but now there are sort of well-funded and supported multi-city networks all over the world, where practitioners such as ourselves are in direct contact with one another. You know, I sit on a multi-city collaboration call on a weekly basis, and we hear from peers across the country, across the world, about how they're dealing with things. And we talk about everything from transportation to public education to the use of technology in the public right of way. So there's lots of channels increasingly out there. You know, like the work that I do is a little bit different than Taylor or Wandy. So I'll let them talk about, from a housing perspective, the cities that they look to. But, you know, we look at, in the New Urban Mechanics context, we look at cities large and small. So, you know, there are cities like, we look at Philadelphia, you know, a city that's physically and demographically rather similar to us. But we also look at Seattle and Los Angeles and Barcelona and Cluj in Romania. And so we look to a variety of cities, and we look at them from the perspective of the kinds of systems that they have there, you know, and we pay special attention to issues of equity and diversity, which means that it's often easier to have a conversation, an in-depth conversation with a city in the global south than it is with a city in Northern Europe, you know, who just have a very different demographic profile to their cities. And so we try to be as broad-minded as possible as we talk to and learn from other cities.
Taylor or Wandy?
Sorry, cat difficulties.
I was gonna say there's a cat battle going on over there.
Yes. So I would echo much of what Nigel said in terms of kind of looking to lots of different cities for inspiration. And I think I would add both like real and imaginary cities to that as well in terms of thinking about sources of inspiration. There's lots of things that cities both in the US and in other places are doing that are really interesting to us, whether it's around how cities are approaching things like additional dwelling units or figuring out ways to engage residents through different channels, thinking about different types of partnerships across kind of resident groups, but also with different organizations. So there's lots to learn from different types of places, but I think we're also looking kind of to fiction in some ways as well, in terms of thinking about like what is possible that we can't even quite think about as being possible yet. And I think looking to cities that don't actually exist as models for things that we can't quite give our space to imagine yet is something that we do as well.
Okay, I have an interesting question from Adam. He'd like to know, do you think that Boston will ever ban single-family housing as Minneapolis did? What major policy move like this would you love to see Boston taking the lead on?
So I would not reframe the question, but I think my response is less about kind of like banning single family, but instead pivoting, or not pivoting, but shifting to think more about like, what are we creating space for and what type of city do we want Boston to be, and starting with those types of questions. So if we're thinking together around what type of city do we want Boston to be, and then it's a matter of answering, if we kind of come to some consensus around that, then what do we need to do in order to get there? And I think starting with those types of questions will help us get to kind of what are the policy changes that we need to make in order to really realize the shared vision of Boston that we have.
And I'll just add also that to echo what Taylor has said, there's something that Minneapolis' approach is really also interesting in talking about how there needs to be a focus on really diversifying the stock of housing. And I think that that's something that Boston has been very intentional about voicing as well. And it's something that we continue to work towards. And so we continuously keep that in mind as well as we move forward in diversifying the housing stock here.
Great, thank you. Here's another question from someone who's anonymous. When low and mid-priced housing is so important and is enabling growth in our city, are there ways to reduce not in my backyardism that can allow more diversity in our housing offerings?
So I can definitely get us started on this. I'm thinking also about how oftentimes a lot of people's feelings towards and like apprehension towards specific forms of housing means that they want something that fits within the context of what they're familiar with, and that there is a way to work within that familiarity that can still really allow for innovation to take place in numerous ways. And so I think that an approach that we try to take is to really talk about what that familiarity is and what context it is that we want to continue to build upon.
Julia asks, are the areas being considered for affordable housing likely to be more vulnerable to environmental hazards like air pollution near highways or risk of flooding? What can you do to make exposure to those hazards more equitable?
That's an excellent question. And so I would break that up into, well, there are kind of two tracks of that answer, because on the one hand, there's a conversation around the parcels or opportunities for development that the city has access to, and kind of thinking about this where those parcels are kind of located across the city. Many of those parcels are in Roxbury, Mattapan, Dorchester is kind of where our remaining parcels that we have in the city's portfolio are. And then we know that there are a number of communities across Boston that experience vulnerability due to rising sea level, to air pollution, to noise pollution. And I think we are constantly thinking about how we reduce the number of communities that are going to be negatively impacted by all of those things, and thinking about the types of housing that is happening in those places, but also trying to really be mindful that we want to create opportunities across the city for housing, and really ensuring that each neighborhood is really a place where anyone has the opportunity to call home.
All right, and I have one more question from Chris. We have time for. Can you speak to the difficulty in balancing the cost of development in Boston with affordability of the resulting housing?
I mean, that's the multi-million-dollar question issue that we have, not just in Boston, but in so many high-cost cities, where creating housing of any type is really expensive, and creating affordable or income restricted housing is also incredibly expensive. And so we really look to kind of what we're talking about here, at least in this virtual forum, is kind of what are the opportunities that exist with land that the city owns. So in those cases, we already have ownership of this land, so the development cost in many ways we would imagine would be less than if a developer was having to acquire a parcel on the private market. So you're paying both for the acquisition costs and then all of the costs that come with development. But this is definitely a space where we think that there's opportunity to explore kind of different types of construction methods, but also exploring different types of ownership that could potentially help with lowering costs for folks. But yes, this is the issue that not only Boston faces, but many cities across the US, across the globe are really struggling to handle in this moment, or both in this moment, preceding this moment, for foreseeable future.
Thank you. I think I'll hand it back over to Emily, unless either Nigel or Wandy want to say something else.
I'm good.
I'll just quickly add that in our section 2 video, there is this diagram that really speaks to what Taylor just mentioned, and how, we sort of balance those different costs. So thank you.
Perfect. Thank you to all of you, our panelists. A virtual round of applause. And thank you, Janine, for doling out all of those questions. We're not quite done yet. Now it's time to learn about how we want to hear from each and every one of you. I'd like to welcome Kevin Miniter, founder of Consider It, the amazing online dialogue platform we will be using to gather all of your thoughts. So if our other panelists could go ahead and turn off their videos and mute, and we'll welcome Kevin on. Welcome, Kevin.
Hello. As Emily said, I'm Kevin, one of the founders of Consider It. My pronouns are he and him, and I'll give a basic intro of the software that we use for online dialogues, why we made this tool, how it works, and then show you how to take part in this dialogue. Okay, are we ready? Can people hear me, and can they see my screen as I share it?
I can hear you and I can see your screen.
Fantastic, wonderful. So I'm not sure if you all are aware, but we're in an age of unprecedented hyperpartisanship. Our software interfaces like Facebook and Twitter reward the most bombastic opinions above well-reasoned ones and are creating silos of thought. We saw this as a design flaw of these software, and we wanted to create a space where people can think critically, listen to each other, learn from each other, and create more thoughtful opinions. Thus, Consider It was born. These might sound like hefty claims, but we do have National Science Foundation research that shows the software's architecture does this and nudges people to make more nuanced opinions. So let's see Consider It in action. Okay, now let's imagine we're all members of the Star Wars Galactic Federation, and we're in a community planning process right now. The Death Star and its overlords have petitioned to join the Galactic Federation. You know, we're a pretty open society, so we should think critically about this before making a decision. The first thing that we see with Consider It is the pro and con list. This is Ben Franklin's original design solution for decision making. This nudges us to consider both sides of an issue, and we write our thoughts as points on the pro and con list. This could create some brand issues. Do we really want to be associated with an overly imperialistic entity? In the margins, we can see the pro and con points of our peers. We're encouraged to read these and include these in our own personal lists. Oh, look, we're finding agreement with our own peers by including their points in our own personal list. We use the slider to move people away from, people show their opinions overall on a sliding scale, moving people away from hyper-partisan polls to share more nuanced opinions. Once you decided what your feeling is, click and save, and behold, in an instant, Consider It organizes all the opinions of here 50 individuals so you can understand what their feelings are overall on this histogram and what their reasons are beneath this as pro and con points ranked by their persuasiveness. Now we can start exploring patterns of thought. We can click on the histogram and scroll through to understand which different groups think about this proposal. So here we have the people who support the Death Star joining the Galactic Federation. Seems to be a lot of stormtroopers there, but even these supporters recognize some trade-offs. The top con point for this group is they do recognize that the Death Star does have terrible Wi-Fi. Now let's scroll over and see what the reservations are of the opposers. These are the points that resonate most with them. The individual isn't lost in the crowd. We can click on an individual and see what points resonate with them. And we can hover over a point and understand who agrees with it. So this point over here was written by Jabba the Hutt, and in the histogram, we can see what individuals lit on up because of that. We can also have conversations around the individual points by clicking on the point and responding to that specific point. And those are the basics of Consider It. We designed a software that encourages people to give nuanced feelings overall on a slider, nudges them to consider both sides of an issue with a pro and con list, helps them listen and agree with their peers by including their peers' points in their own personal pro and con lists, and then instantly organizes so we can see the opinions of hundreds of people. Now, let's have the fun part of seeing Consider It in action with our Thinking Outside the Blocks dialogue. Please go to mos.consider.it if you haven't. The first thing that we ask people to do is go to the upper right-hand corner, click Log In to create a profile. And then if you don't have an account, click here to create an account. Here you're asked a few simple questions. Only zip code is mandatory. And then below this, we ask all participants to take a civility pledge. Imagine the same sort of standard of behavior you would have at an in-person town hall. After this, we ask you to start learning about this conversation. So you will begin by reading the introduction here. Below this are the stakeholders you will see throughout the dialogue. They represent different interests that you are asked to consider and to take into account as you make up your own opinion. Below this, there are 3 sections to give your opinion on. The sections include videos to help you learn more about how Boston oversees lot development and housing development, and includes a lot of the information that Wendy and Taylor shared with us. For the lot development section, you are tasked with helping a team decide how to fill an empty lot. For the slider, you're asked to give your priority overall from low priority to high priority. So how much of a priority is having a parking lot for you? And how much of a priority is having green space for you? If you want to click, you can learn more about each of these priorities. And then you can see the pro and con points of your peers. You can write your own pro and con points. And you can either navigate down to the bottom of the page to see where you are in the lot development section. You're currently in housing and you can navigate to the next areas, or you can just easily navigate back to the home page. From here, section 2 is housing development. What type of housing do you want to put on your lot? Here you're asked to share which combination of social, economic, and environmental priorities you support. And then below this are open-ended questions. Here you're asked to create your own proposals to answer these open-ended questions, such as what would your ideal housing development look like? And who do you think should be involved in the decision-making process? To create a new proposal, all you need to do is click Add New, and then write a clear and concise summary about it. And if you want to add more details, you can add it right there, and then click Done, and it'll be added to the list of all these other proposals created by your peers. And you're also asked to give feedback to the proposals that your peers have created. So those are the basics of how to navigate this site. I'll be on the webinar and we'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. And Consider It is asynchronous, so it allows you to give your feedback over the coming weeks on a schedule that works best for you. And you can also come back and change and update your opinion based on new information you've learned. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and thank you all.
Thank you so much, Kevin. That was so helpful. So now that you've heard an explanation of the site, it's time for you to go and explore and enter your own opinions. Go to mos.considerit in your internet browser, and I can share a screen so that way you can all see what that actually looks like. Let's see. All right, so type in mos.consider.it in your internet browser and hit enter. Go ahead and get started by reading through the information at the top of the page after you create an account. You do not have to be from Boston to participate. We believe these topics are relevant in many places and welcome your opinion. When you get to mos.considerit, remember to click login and create an account to get started and save your opinions. The email that you provide will only be used to send a follow-up survey and share any additional ways to be involved with this program. The site will remain active for about a month, so feel free to check back often and see what your fellow community members have to say. We will stay on the webinar for a few more minutes to answer any questions you have about getting started with Consider It. For now, I would like to once again thank all of our excellent speakers, fantastic speakers. A virtual round of applause to everyone who participated today. Thank you all so much. And thank you to Kevin, of course, for setting up Consider It for us. It's a wonderful site and we can't wait to see what you all have to say. A big thank you to all of you tuning in. Thank you for spending some time with us this afternoon. We hope you enjoyed the program, and if you did, please visit www.mos.org/Science Matters to support MOS at home. Once again, that's www.mos.org/Science Matters. Have a great rest of your night, afternoon, whatever time it is, everyone, and we hope you will join us again soon. We will be here for a few more minutes. If you have any questions about getting started, once again, feel free to put those in the Q&A. We'll be here until 5:30. And I will put the How does this all work up again?